Hey folks, welcome back. This is the Colonel in Cape Town, the mother city of Cape Town. I'm joined today by author, member of parliament, and now leader of the Freedom Front Plus, none other than Dr. Corne Mulder.
Thank you, Chris. It's wonderful to have you in Cape Town, and it's wonderful to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Well, I have to admit, I'm kind of a little fanboy-like here. I've never been in parliament here. I thought I'd never see these buildings after they got torched, but hey.
Well, the offices were not torched, and luckily. We are very happy for that, but the parliamentary buildings themselves were completely torched. And it seems to take forever to try and build something new. So in the meantime, Parliament is meeting in a tent next door, but luckily our offices are still functional.
So you mentioned Parliament meets in a tent.
Yes.
Is there aircon?
When we don't have power failures, yes.
Thank you, ESCOM.
Yes, of course. No,
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so today I wanted to talk to Dr. Mulder about a few things. First of which, congratulations on taking over leadership of the party.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, I've been a founding member of the party 30 years ago. I've served diligently under three leaders. First General Viljoen, then my brother was leader, then Dr. Groenewald. And well, there came a time when you decide, are you going to make yourself available or not? I was approached by some people. During two previous cycles in the party for organization, I was asked to make myself available. I declined. But I decided I think it's time to do it, and I'm very happy that it was so. I said from the beginning I would prefer it to be unanimous. You can't prescribe that, obviously. We're a democratic party. But in the end, it was unanimous, and I'm very thankful for that.
Well, I didn't realize it was unanimous. Congratulations.
Yes.
So for you, it's going to be a little different here as a member of parliament because your predecessor, Dr. Groenewald, was also a cabinet minister.
Yes.
No. So now you're not a cabinet minister.
No, I'm not. In terms of the Government of National Unity, we were given a position in the executive, and Dr. Groenewald took up that position as Minister of Correctional Services while he was still the leader. He is still the Minister of Correctional Services in the executive, but no longer the leader. And I think it gives me a very good positioning that I can play the role as leader of the party, represent the party when it comes to anything that deals with the party, also in dealing with the executive. But I'm not part of the executive, and I'm not bound by anything that happens in cabinet.
I think that's an important distinction. I was puzzled by, not to pick on folks, but John Steenhuisen taking up the Ministry of Agriculture while remaining the leader of the Democratic Alliance. I mean, that's a major party with a lot of support and a full-time job. So that's really two full-time jobs. Now Gabe McKenzie's also the leader of the Patriotic Alliance. He's taken up the sports ministry. No shade on Gabe McKenzie, but I think the sports ministry is a little less challenging than agriculture. So, and he has a smaller party. So maybe that's doable to have those two jobs. But I thought for John Steenhuisen, it's a big challenge. And for the Freedom Front Plus, too, I thought that, because corrections has a lot of problems.
Absolutely.
They're underfunded. They've got a total mess. And bless Dr. Groenewald for taking that on. But I thought that maybe that was a bit of a stretch, and maybe now he can focus better.
Yes, that was the idea. I think he decided not to make himself available again. I said I was prepared to stand, and I was then elected. And let him focus on correctional services. It's, as you correctly point out, that's a huge challenge. But to me, the challenge is the Freedom Front Plus and the people we represent. That is my priority, nothing else.
Well, the party dropped a bit in this last election support. And I think that reading the tea leaves, it seemed to me that some people migrated to the Democratic Alliance in hopes the Democratic Alliance had reached a certain threshold. I think some of them buyer's remorse now. Some of those voters.
Correct.
So I suspect that maybe big things are in the works for your party in the next election. And I'm not talking about the national, but I'm talking about the municipal elections coming up.
Yes, absolutely. We did lose some support in the last election, which is unfortunate. I think there are various reasons for that. I did some analysis from my perspective in terms of what we did wrong. And I think I know what the answer is. We are not a party that thinks that we could become the majority ever in South Africa. We represent.
That's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen. But if I want to speak on behalf of a minority, I can only do so if I represent the majority of that minority. And that is what we need to do. I need to position the party next to our constituency and to expose what is in the hearts and the minds of our own people. And by doing so, I want the party to become the absolute natural political home of the Afrikaner people, as well as other minorities who would like to associate and work with us.
Well, you mentioned other minorities, Dr. Mulder. So I've talked extensively to the Freedom Front Plus and other parties.
Yes.
And one of the things I encourage your party and others to do is to reach out to colored voters,
Sure.
Indians, and
Yeah,
even
sure.
black voters,
Yeah.
and grow. There was some effort, I think, a few black voters in Gauteng kind of came to your standard in the municipal election. Is that going well, or is there a plan to expand that?
Yes, definitely. The party accepted when we amended our constitution at the end of last year. We also brought in a new section in the constitution that we call a credo, and in that we make it very clear where do we stand in terms of our market. And first of all, we are true to who we are. We came as an Afrikaner party, and we're going to stand with that. But we also reach out and we want to create a party that becomes the home for minorities and minority issues. And in doing so, specifically reach out to other minorities like the colored community, the Khoi, the San, Indian community. Even if you look at traditionally the English-speaking white South Africans, they also form a minority.
Yes.
So we want to reach out to that, and from our perspective, the true test of a democracy is not one person, one vote. It's the question of how do you take care of your minorities.
I think it's a fair question. It's interesting, the history of South Africa having a minority ruling over a majority, which is
Sure.
a really odd situation.
Sure.
But now it's flipped the opposite direction, majority ruling over minority. And I've often argued, you look historically in different countries, Rwanda, all kinds of places around the world, when a majority rules over a minority, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
Because you have
Yes.
to ensure you protect minority rights.
Absolutely, and specifically if you are a well-performing minority, you can very easily become a target.
Well, look at the Jews.
Exactly.
I think the Jews are a perfect example.
Perfect example. And the Afrikaners are experiencing the same in Africa. We are a performing minority in Africa, in South Africa, but we also must understand, since we came to Africa 370 years ago, there was not one day that we were a majority. We've always been a minority. Mm-hmm. But we succeeded in 370 years as a minority because we were able to adapt. We were able to make plans. We didn't create a problem situation where we are just the bad guys. We are constructive. And I believe in the end, we need to find some kind of arrangement, some kind of an agreement, which also accommodates the aspirations of the Afrikaner and other minorities. It can be done, and we are optimistic that it will be done.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if you and I have had this conversation. If we have, I apologize in advance. But I've talked about this a lot because when I started doing these broadcasts in 2020, a lot of my audience, white Afrikaners, would say, black South Africans will always vote for the ANC. And I said, that isn't going to be true. No. And I was very prophetic, wasn't I?
Absolutely.
But the other piece of this was I said, but folks, you have to get out of your tent. You have to get out of your locker. You have to go out,
Yes.
go beyond your oxen, your wagons, and look to your neighbors. And there's this historical precedent for this. Let me tell you, you know history. So when the Great Trek happened, you saw the four trekkers go north. And at the time, because in Mfikani, a lot of open space where tribes were fleeing from Zulukazi and then the Ndebele and the Zulu, all this stuff going on. So a lot of open space. But you had instances where Zulukazi and Ndebele were preying on the Barolong, on the Bakwena, on the Basutu people, on the Griquas.
Yes. Yes.
And we have multiple incidences of the four trekkers forming alliances with these groups and fighting off the Ndebele, who mostly fled up to Bulawayo, to Zimbabwe. And there is a natural tendency for these groups to have things in common with the four trekker. I've made this point, especially the Tswana people, and I've made this point for a long time. I said, if you take the power of 2.8 million Afrikaners, and then you take, say, 2 million white South Africans beyond that, and then you look at 6 to 8 million coloreds, many of whom have cultural affinity or Dutch Calvinists and speak Afrikaans, and then on top of that, you throw on the Indian community, and suddenly you go from 2.8 million to 13 to 16 million South Africans.
Yes.
Now, you won't get all those people, but that's a huge pool of people. And that's before you even try to get black South Africans to join your cause.
Correct. You're absolutely right. The history clearly indicates that throughout our history, there's been positive and constructive cooperation with other groups. We have never tried to isolate ourselves. We've always tried to make ourselves part and parcel of the bigger whole. And that makes the Afrikaner also quite unique. I always quite often say, if you look at the Afrikaner people, I'm not a European. I'm an African.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm a white African. My family came here in 1685. The people that I belong to has named ourselves to our continent. My mother tongue is Afrikaans. We are part and parcel of Africa. And this is where we want to succeed. This is where we're going to survive. And I honestly believe if I have interaction with people from other communities in South Africa, there's a very good relationship between the different communities. On a one-on-one basis, there are no problems. There are some political leaders and some political parties that go around and try to create a revolution or try to create conflict, etc., etc. But if you reach out to people on a one-on-one basis, it's a different ballgame altogether, and we will continue to do so.
Well, in my experience with South Africans, black, white, brown, whatever, my experience with most South Africans is that most people simply want peace and security.
Yes.
They want to be able to worship in their faith.
Yes.
They want to be able to raise their children and have them do better than they did.
Exactly.
Whether they're black, brown, or white.
Exactly. They want a future for themselves and for their children in a peaceful and harmonious way. So the political leaders in some of the parties that are more with their own ideas from Cuba and from Venezuela and all the rogues in the world, and Moscow and Beijing and all that, they've got all kinds of different agendas. And they try to push these things. For example, it's all about the main sin, it's about land. It's not about land. People out there want a job. They want an income. They want to create a future for their family and their children. For that, you need economic growth, you need job creation, etc., etc. But some of these guys are pushing these ideological agendas all the time. But slowly but surely, I think they are running out of time because the ordinary citizen out there, black or white, understand that that alone will not bring success, and they know they need something else, a different option.
Well, this is where Afrikaans becomes quite handy. I think many South Africans are hotful of what's going on. They've just had enough. Whether they're black, white, or colored, or Indian, they've had enough. It's frustrating, and you see it in some of these polls. I don't know if we can trust the polls for reliability, but certainly you get that sense. So let me shift a little bit in our conversation here. So you're in Parliament. You're the longest-serving member in Parliament.
That's
you were
true.
Here in the old days when the National Party ruled.
Yes.
And you weren't in the National Party, were you?
No.
So you can't lay that on him.
No.
But you're the longest-serving member of Parliament. You've been here for a long time. So, in some ways it makes sense that you became the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, because if anybody knows how this building works, or buildings, it would be you. So what's the word around the water cooler now about what's going on? I mean, we see the ruling, well, there's no ruling party. It's the governing national union, and your party's part of it. But the plurality party, which is the ANC, some people outside these walls get the impression that some people in the ANC are a little concerned about where they're headed.
No, definitely. I would say the ANC inherited the most modern, most strongest economy, strongest military power in Southern Hemisphere at the time. They inherited that on a silver plate. They succeeded in destroying it to a very large extent. I would say there's nothing that the ANC did not touch that is not in trouble. Quite often, one of the most prolific things that we hear quite often is that we need a turnaround strategy. Everything needs to be turned around. Why? Because it was destroyed. Now, the reality is, after 30 years, we still need to deal with all the realities that's out there. People want to create a future. And suddenly the magic of the ANC, and the ANC had a wonderful past. They had a free ride internationally. Everybody said, ANC, it's Mandela's party.
Everybody wants to be part of the rainbow experience.
Exactly. That has come and gone. And the reason for that is the ANC has gone out there and positioned themselves with all the rogues in the world, and they could not deliver internally. There's no reason why South Africa was not the powerhouse of Africa. We should be the locomotive that pulls the train of Africa, but they destroyed that. And suddenly, we are dealing with those realities. Ordinary people out there say, you did not bring a difference in my daily life, and we are looking for alternatives. And because of that, you see the ANC support is declining. The high point was in the second term of Mr. Mbeki, when the ANC had a 2/3 majority in terms of the elective result. Now they've gone below 50, they've gone below 40. They ended up in the last election 39. Opinion polls give them about 30% now. So it's quite clear where we are going. They are on their way out. And that's just the reality. And people look with different eyes to the future and say, but there are alternatives and we can find a way to take South Africa forward, and we are part of that.
So there's a phrase that I used for a long time when explaining Zimbabwe. We're going back to the farm invasions before that. And I said that ZANU-PF got away many, many years with doing whatever they wanted with liberation credentials.
Yes.
They had liberation credentials. And I said there comes a time when liberation credentials don't matter anymore, because you have more people born after.
Exactly.
So that's the situation in South Africa. The majority of the population has been born since 1994, born frees.
Yes.
So the only national governance they've ever known is the African National Congress. And with the exception of Western Cape, where we're sitting at, every other province has been governed, although I think maybe the IFP briefly had the KZN, but
for a short
period of time. But other than that, it's been ANC at the provincial and the national level.
Yeah.
And they have worn out the liberation credentials, I would argue.
Yes, you can only go so far with trying to bring back the beautiful, glorious past from your perspective. But if you can't deliver, if you can't get the economy to grow, if you can't create jobs, if people see that they are getting poorer by the day, then people is not going to buy into that. And then obviously if you top that up with black economic empowerment, which is basically elite empowerment, you top that up with corruption.
Legal racism, actually.
Exactly. You top that up with corruption, rampant corruption, crime, no service delivery that is quite effective. People say, no, enough. We can find a different future. We don't have to go that route. And that's why you see the absolute decline within the ANC. And then surely the party is also breaking up into different
factions.
Inside, yeah. MK is a faction. The EFF is a faction. COPE was a faction. So it's breaking up.
People forget about that. They look and say the ANC's come down, but there are still voters. They're just broke off into other parties.
They're breaking up.
So let me shift the focus a little bit again here, too. So on February 7th of 2025, my president, Donald Trump, issued an executive order related to South Africa. It's the first time an American politician has really said anything about South Africa in many years.
Yes.
So that executive order said a couple things. The first, and people in the government here have latched on to the wrong things, in my view, and I'm explaining my point.
Yeah.
So the first thing in the order was that owing to racism and unfair practices that affect education, business, and other aspects of life in South Africa, and on hateful rhetoric directed towards ethnic minorities, that was the first thing. So that obviously is talking about white South Africans, in particular Afrikaners. The second thing was the International Court of Justice case against Israel. But then the next thing was the most important from my point of view, and I've been trying to tell this to ANC politicians, but they're not listening. So that was the most important. The harm that South Africa has done to our interests, national interests, and our national security interests of us, the United States, and our friends, partners, and allies. And then finally, the last thing on there was your close relationship with Tehran in military, commercial, and nuclear fields. So that order, I'm wondering if it sent shockwaves here in Parliament. Did anybody even notice it?
It happened in South African time frame on a late Friday night.
It was, because I went live within 2 hours of it.
Yes, so that Saturday morning we all woke up with this earth-shattering event.
Now, see, if he was watching my content, he would have been up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Because I was broadcasting too. I had 38,000 people tune in. It's crazy. Anyway, so you woke up Saturday morning.
And this happened, and it was like an earthquake, because for the first time in many, many years, there was direct involvement from the United States administration with regard to the affairs of South Africa. And the ANC has been used for more than 30 years that the United States doesn't really get involved, and the ANC can do whatever they like, and you go on, and we will turn a blind eye, or we will basically sanction what you're doing in a positive manner. And here comes Mr. Trump with an absolute clarion call in terms of this, that, and the other is wrong. For example, if you look at the part of the executive order in terms of discrimination against Afrikaners and whites, etc., we've been so paralyzed with black economic empowerment that we didn't take note of what's happening in the United States with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And we didn't read the room and to see what the result and the pushback in the US was. So it makes absolute sense that the president came with that and all the other aspects as well. It was earth-shattering. And that, on a personal note, that's why I love politics. Something like that happens, and it changes everything.
Overnight.
Overnight, immediately. And either you adapt with that, or it passes you by.
That is amazing. So, to clarify why this happened, obviously President Trump came in office, but the DEI thing is dying now. The wokeism that Helen Zilla likes to write about, go woke, go broke, is beginning to die in America. But this all started in Virginia a few years ago. There was a high school student. She was raped by a transgender male in the women's or the girls' bathroom in high school. The school covered up the rape. The girl, of course, was ashamed. She was raped. She didn't tell her father. He found out about it. When he found out about it, he went to the school board meeting and he said, "Why are you hiding this rape of my daughter?" And then they had him escorted, because the school board didn't want to hear what he had to say. They escorted him out by the police. That became national news. Glenn Youngkin ran as Republican for the first time in the history of Virginia, which had been a red state for centuries, but now it's a kind of a purple state. He was the first Republican ever to win every single county in Virginia, even the counties around D.C. So Youngkin won as a Republican, but it was because of that. That was the first pushback. Then the second step in this was Elon Musk putting together a group to buy Twitter and allowing free speech, and then the return of Trump. All those things. We're now saving America and maybe the world.
No, that's absolutely true. If you look at President Trump and you look at the Trump administration, you find also in South Africa, there are people that are absolutely supportive and they're absolutely against. Nobody's neutral, or and I think the same in the United States and everywhere else.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. But the fact of the matter is that what is being put on the table didn't happen just by coincidence. It's a process. In other words, the pendulum swung so far to the absolute lunacy, ridiculous, that it had to come back to normality. And that is exactly the process that's happening at the moment, to the benefit of everybody. The whole global agenda, the whole woke agenda, international, etc. And what I like in terms of what President Trump did on the 7th of February, he took out a magnifying glass and he put that on South Africa and the ANC. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely necessary. It's absolutely essential. For the ANC now to squeal about that, etc., that's their problem. I think it's the right thing to do, and we should absolutely welcome those kind of things that happened.
Well, I often say that sunlight is the best antiseptic.
Yes, very true. Oh, very true. Very true.
And perhaps that's what needs to be
Sure.
shown here, and that's what
Sure.
Trump is doing. But there is an unfortunate side to this for South Africans, and that is we suspended aid, which affected HIV immensely because the President Bush created the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR,
Yeah.
5-year program, $15 billion, but we spent $45 billion in those 5 years because Congress loved it. They kept putting more money into it. But it was a 5-year program, 22 years ago.
Still going on.
Yeah, at some point, people are supposed to take responsibility for this.
Exactly.
Botswana has done a pretty good job taking responsibility.
Exactly.
But South Africa has still allowed us to pay the freight.
But you cannot be friends with all the enemies of the United States and expect their aid and their support and their investments. And that is what the ANC has done. They wanted to be friends with all the rogue states in the world, all the enemies of the United States and the United States' national interest. But at the same time, they want investments from the US and US aid. You cannot do that. You must make your choice.
Well, and we get now to the tariffs. Okay, so there are tariffs applied to South Africa, as there are to many countries right now, in an effort by Trump to get people to come to the table and work out better deals.
Sure.
The South Africans in the press like to talk about how things are even and fair, but they're not. South Africa applied a 75% poultry tariff against our imports a few years ago. We didn't reciprocate. That was previous administration. And so Trump now is putting tariffs on the table to try to get the artificial barriers and the physical barriers out of the way. So that's how I came up with this formula. So going forward right now for 90 days, assuming that this government can get a team over to Washington and negotiate, which hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened. Everyone else, by the way, the Japanese and the South Koreans had a team in the air 8 hours after Trump announced it.
Exactly.
Because they were waiting for it. But South Africa hasn't gotten over it yet. But assuming they can get someone over to negotiate it, for now it's 10% on all products. With the exception of the automotive industry, which is devastating for South Africa. You have 141,000 jobs tied to exports to the U.S.
Exactly.
25,533 cars produced last year shipped to the U.S. That is a significant portion of your domestic market. So South Africa's 600,000 a year sales isn't going to be able to absorb that.
No.
So that means layoffs, redundancies. And that's not just those people in the auto industry. It's all the parts makers. All the restaurants, all the places they eat, they shop at. Checkers, ShopRite, Pick and Pay aren't going to get their revenue. This could be devastating.
Exactly. The Trump administration made it clear by saying, come to the table. Those who come first will get the best deals. As soon as possible, move. I can't understand why South Africa has not done so immediately. We must understand the bigger picture. South African government is still focused on AGOA. I think AGOA is something of the past. It was something that was negotiated many years ago. And there's no reason why you cannot bring something new in the state of AGOA, which could be a trade deal that can accommodate you on a much bigger and a more modern kind of scale than AGOA. And we should read the room and understand that AGOA, as far as I know, is going to be phased out. But South Africa must step up and make this move. And what we need is, as you correctly say, we need a delegation to go to the United States and put South Africa's case, not to try and convince the Trump administration as if everything is fine in South Africa. And no, that's not the case. There are huge problems in here and they need to be dealt with. But in a responsible way, I think we need to reset the relationship between South Africa and the United States. And Mr. Rasool did not assist in his utterances.
No, he didn't do that.
Not at all.
Not at all. So what's interesting to me is if I look at the recent history of Africa and I look at another country that was a similar level as South Africa, economically and politically and militarily at one stage, that's really advanced, and I'm not saying I endorse the guy who runs the country because I'm not an Erdogan fan for Turkey, but Turkey has trade representatives in over 40 countries in Africa. Turkey has expanded its presence throughout Africa, and they're not the ones. Morocco has done the same thing, but they've gone to Francophone Africa, expanding insurance businesses. So you see Moroccan insurance companies in Cote d'Ivoire and in Mali and places like that, and you see Turkish airlines everywhere in Africa. But South African Airways has withered and gone away, and South African business, which was expanding in Africa, has retracted. We've seen different ShopRite close in Uganda, things like that. MTN is still in Nigeria, it's their biggest market. But my point here is that instead of reaching across Africa and becoming a colossus, other players are stepping in instead of South Africa.
Absolutely, it's a vital miscalculation by the ANC, and part of that is, I would argue that with Afrikaners, they are your strongest ally that could be used and be beneficial to South Africa, not only in South Africa, but throughout Africa. Why? We are committed to South Africa. We are committed to Africa. We don't have a second passport. We don't have dual citizenship. We are committed to be here and to make a difference. And over 360, 70 years, we have shown a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of hard work, a lot of expertise, people that are committed to make that difference. But if you take that minority group and you make them the focus of your anger and your policies against them, it's negative. It's to the detriment. Instead of protecting them and using them and giving them the opportunity to take combined South Africa out into the Africa, etc. South Africa should be the locomotive, but we are not. We are not. And the reason for that, part of that is we are being focused. The focus was so much in terms of international relations on BRICS and moving away from the West and having a focus to the East and try to become part of the BRICS thing, blah, 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 etc. But it's unrealistic. It was just not going to do what it needs to be done, and we are paying the price. It's never too late. I think slowly but surely, as the ANC's influence is diminishing at this stage, there will be new processes, there will be new things, and luckily in terms of our electoral system, which is proportional, hopefully we will never again have a situation where one party alone has got a majority. The future lies with coalitions, with cooperating, with working together, and as we move into that, it will become more mature and people will understand what it really means, because at the moment, it's not being implemented in the right way as well.
Well, obviously, I'm biased. I'm an American. I think I come from the greatest country in the world, although South Africa's a nice second. But I'm biased, so let's put that on the table.
Sure.
But the relationship with the United States, I think, is absolutely critical for South Africans from my perspective. It doesn't matter to America in the big scheme of things. We're not using military bases here. We don't rely on strategic minerals from here, despite what Gwede Mantashe thinks. We don't rely on that. Anyway, we don't rely on those minerals. We can get them other places, a few things. The biggest one from here is platinum, and that's becoming less important as we switch to electric cars.
Yeah.
So, but for South Africans, the $20 billion in two-way trade every year is critically important. I talk about the automotive industry, but also the wine industry, the fresh fruits industry, and many others beyond that. Beyond that, it's not just that. Who is the largest shareholder in the IMF and the World Bank? The United States. You want money?
Of course.
Who influences whether you get it or not?
Of course.
The United States can represent South Africa's interests on a global stage in ways that the South African government doesn't seem to recognize.
Of course.
And it goes much beyond that. There are tens of thousands of South Africans who are working for American companies remotely, which almost no economist has even taken into consideration. I know many of these people. They work here, they're paid in dollars, and they pay their tax. They pay their tax. Okay, SARS, don't go looking for them. They pay their taxes. But my point is that their income is dependent on working for an American company. The United States could so harm South Africa's economy if people keep angering Trump. We can embargo trade here. We can block American companies from doing business here, like what's happened in the 80s. In the 80s, the economy was able to overcome that in many ways. More resilient. But that infrastructure is gone now. That human capital, a lot of it has gone to Europe or to Australia, New Zealand. It's not here anymore.
It's gone.
So if the United States wanted to hurt South Africa, and I don't want the United States to hurt South Africa, the United States could really hurt South Africa.
Sure. That's on the negative side. But I want to see it exactly on the opposite. Just think in terms of the positive side. What it could be like if we've got a normal relationship with the United States, being the biggest economy, being the strongest military power, etc., etc. Talking about military bases, we need to talk about Simonstown. Because Simonstown, as far as I'm concerned, is part of the interests of the Western Hemisphere from the South.
Well, Joe Pollack thinks so.
Absolutely. Well, I agree with that. I agree with that. We cannot allow the Chinese to have a foothold here.
That's a fair point.
And let's see how that plays out. But can you imagine if we are serious in South Africa, and that is what the electorate wants. They want economic growth. They want job creation. If we can have a constructive relationship with the United States and get serious, real investment, and get serious American companies to invest and to create jobs and to bring their expertise, etc., just imagine what can be done in terms of the development of South Africa, of Southern Africa, etc., etc. That's what we should aim for. Never mind the negative part. You're correct. The United States can harm South Africa in a very dramatic way. Why would the Trump administration do that? They will only do that if South Africa continues on the path that we are at the moment, acting to the detriment of the national interest of the United States. And there are huge concerns in terms of our actions with Iran, with all the rogues out there. Why would you want to do that? And then obviously, if you look at the executive order of Mr. Trump, that court case against Israel was a vital major mistake. And the ANC is so caught up in their own little world in terms of their own reality. They went after, a few days after the 7th of October, they went to have a beautiful photo op with the whole executive, then with all their Palestinian Hamas scarves, etc., etc. What kind of optics are they sending out to the world, to the Jewish community, to the international community? But that is part of the whole process, and that is something that still needs to be addressed. International relations cannot be the sole domain of the ANC with their warped idea coming from the Cold War period. It can't.
Well, what's interesting is because, not to pick on President Ramaphosa, but to pick on President Ramaphosa.
Sure.
Two things stand out. During the COVID era, the United States took the safety measures off and produced vaccines.
Yes.
And I'm not arguing for or against the efficacy of that. That's
Sure.
not the point here. But South Africa chose to go with COVAX from the United Nations. That was, to get their supply there, which never really materialized the way it was supposed to. Instead of offering your domestic pharmaceutical industry like Aspen Pharmacare to collaborate with Abbott and with AstraZeneca and with all these other companies that were producing these vaccines and help us do trials. We did the trials in America and the UK. Most of the people who did this were white folks who were the guinea pigs. So Ramaphosa ran around and screamed, "Vaccine apartheid, vaccine apartheid." Does he not think that we don't remember that Trump doesn't remember that? Because the United States and the European Union gave Aspen Pharmacare $711 million.
Exactly, but that was all part of the ANC's strategic thinking. Part of their positioning was to steer South Africa away from the West, to steer South Africa away from our traditional base in terms of towards BRICS and towards the East. And if they only could really be, if you don't want to be pro the West, just then really be neutral. Say South Africa first and do what we need to do to the East, to the West, but put the country first. They couldn't do that either. The focus is completely to the East, to the detriment of the West. And it's biting South Africa, and it's going to keep on doing so. And that is why we are in trouble at the moment, and that's why the ANC's popularity is also going to come down.
It seems as if the ANC plays to a domestic audience. The constituency they believe that they have, and I think that constituency is fading away. The constituency is fading away. So the vaccine apartheid. The other one is that when the State of the Nation address happened this year, President Ramaphosa, one of the first things he said is, "We will not be bullied." Nobody's bullying you. All we did was stop giving you free money.
Of course.
That's all we did.
Of course. It's the year 2025. The ANC still goes around calling each other comrade. The Cold War is over for how many years now? But that's part of the mindset, and the mindset is basically that loyalty trumps everything. Everything in terms of we stand with Cuba, we will stand with this, we will stand with that. Move on and see the bigger picture. And it's not, as you correctly point out, it's not a question of bullying. It's the world owes us nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing at all. And if you as a country cannot perform on your own and do your own thing, then don't expect anybody else to come to your rescue. Why should they do that? They should have their own focus on their own, what's in their best interest. But it's also an inability of the ANC, to a certain extent, to motivate the South African population. We've never succeeded with nation building. The recipe was wrong from day one. It's still wrong. And the focus is wrong. Instead of making South Africa a strong country, not only a regional player, but an African player and a world player. We've not been able to do so. And they're trying to rely on support from the past and trying to play the victim and those kind of things. It will take you nowhere. There's a real world out there where economics play a real role and countries look out for their own interest and take their things forward and they perform. If you don't perform, don't be surprised that you're being left behind, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Well, Dr. Mulder, you've been very generous with your time here in Parliament. I appreciate it in the offices here, but I do want to ask one more question before we go, and that one's specifically about the future. Yeah. So the African National Congress has publicly stated repeatedly that they want to put 1 million black South Africans into farming, subsistence farming. That's not the future of the world. The future of the world is robotics, artificial intelligence, coding, genetics, medicine. That's the future. But unfortunately, education standards have been so dismal in South Africa. They've been lowered to such a low-level expectation, 30%, and 40% in your first language, that it's comical. I don't want an engineer building the bridge I drive across who got 55% in mathematics. That's a bit scary. So instead of fixing education, it seems to have gone in regression. So for the future, we see that Solidarity Movement has created Soltech, a very successful vocational school, and also academia, a university where people are getting proper education, all done privately.
Sure.
in the short term, is there an answer? Can we fix education in South Africa? Because it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Is the private sector perhaps the answer for education?
No one should be as interested in your future as people should be themselves. To rely on the state is a mistake, and that is why Solidarity has gone private, basically, and we have learned that lesson. Never again will we entrust a government to assist with our education. If we can have it privately, we will take charge of our own destiny in that sense. But nationally, the ANC still thinks, as you correctly point out, that they create this million farmers. Now, it plays, to a certain extent, it plays into the perception of subsistence farming, small patch of land. But that is not the future, as you correctly point out. I really think that those kind of outdated ideas has come and gone. And some people you will never convince. But what we need to do is just to get involvement, we need investment, we need assistance, and just create a new reality. And people will follow that regardless of parties that have this outdated ideological ideas, which will become completely extinct and just become completely irrelevant. We need to create a reality of prosperity, of economic growth, of excellence, of taking people into the future. They will follow. And I can assure you that goes across the board, across the spectrum, in all communities. People are absolutely very positive to go into that positive mindset and that kind of thinking. Those who do not agree with that will become irrelevant and extinct, and the opinion polls indicate that.
And one final thing. This is the refugee program. So a lot of people are actually interested in this program. I don't care what the press tells people in South Africa. A lot of people, not just Afrikaners, but a lot of English-speaking South Africans, a lot of coloreds, and some Indians also interested in the program. And I'm going to make a statement. You correct me if I'm wrong. Even if a significant number of Afrikaners actually leave this country and take advantage of Trump's program when it becomes available, Afrikaners will always be in this country. They'll always be part of the history of South Africa in the future.
Yes, absolutely. I think we should thank President Trump for extending that kind of idea and that accommodation. It's huge. It's the first time in 50 or in 100 years.
Well, since the German government, the Anglo-Boer War.
Exactly. It's the first time since then that another country and the president, which is the head of that state, and not just some country in the United States, by name reaches out to the Afrikaner. We take note of that, and we are very thankful for that, and we will always be thankful for that. Hopefully it will never become necessary to do so, because we see our future as part and parcel of Africa. But then we need to have a secure future. I cannot be subjugated here and be in a position where I can't take my own decisions, where I can't thrive, where my children can't be free, where we can't be safe. So it's a very important thing that was done, and we welcome that program. But we need the assistance of the United States to assist us to do everything possible so that it never becomes necessary. But beyond Africa, we remember what happened in Rwanda, what happened in other places. Things can change overnight. Let's try to prevent that, but thank you very much for reaching out to the Afrikaner.
Well, folks, with that, I want to thank Dr. Corne Mulder. Thank you so much, sir. Baie dankie.
That's a groot plesier. Baie dankie vir die geleentheid. Thank you for the excellent work you are doing. And we are following what's happening in the United States. It's amazing. I didn't think it was going to be possible. I followed your politics throughout. I followed your presidential elections throughout. But the American people have spoken.
And they have indeed. And on November 5th, we saved America, and maybe we can save the world too.
We have to.
Thanks a lot, folks. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.
Thanks very much.